Weather there, Chris?
It is so nice.
Good. All right. So welcome, everyone. We'll give everyone a few minutes to join, as we always do. We have some exciting announcements, some updates, and of course, some time to just spend with everyone going through questions, content, and some important OCD issues. So we'll give everyone a second to join. As you all join, please let us know who you are and where you're calling from. Please use the pane on your right-hand side, the comments box, to let us know who's joining and who is here so that we can be sure to say hello. A couple of updates that we're going to cover in just a second are some updates around logistics. But in the meantime, a couple of updates that we always like to go through. So just a quick reminder and friendly reminder that these events, IOCDF in general, is not a crisis hotline. If you're feeling unsafe or suicidal, we want you to call 911, go to your local emergency room, or call the suicide prevention line at 1-800-273-8255. Of course, for those of you joining internationally, please go and call or contact your local emergency services as they change if you're outside of the US. A couple of important reminders are that this is not therapy. It's not intended to replace therapy. The point of these are for us to do our best to provide some education, hopefully some helpful resources and content, but we would like and would encourage everybody to keep specific treatment questions to something that you address with your individual provider. You can always go to iocdf.org to look up provider options and to get more resources if you're in need of your own personal and individual OCD, anxiety, or related disorder treatment provider. Couple updates. So the OCD and Faith Conference, so the International OCD Foundation is hosting our first ever OCD and Faith Conference in May. It is going to be amazing. It is a free conference that will focus on faith and mental health. So please make sure to visit iocdf.org/faith conference for those of you interested, or if you know anybody who might be of interest. Please make sure to post and share about this, because that's how we'll get the word out about these amazing events within our community. Biggest update is some changes. So I am going on leave, officially kind of, I guess, end of this week, and I will be taking some time off to rest and relax and be with my new family. So I've announced on here that I am expecting and will be induced next week. So I will have an addition to my family, and of course we'll be spending time doing that. But I want to make sure that the entire community knows that we are making sure everyone's covered, and you have amazing individuals who are covering for me, and I think you will greatly benefit more than you would benefit from hearing from me every week. And so the first introduction is for Chris Trondsen. So Chris, who's joining me today, which we're going to work together to answer your questions live today, is an amazing friend, colleague. Chris serves on the board of OCD SoCal. Chris has been involved in IOCDF and was probably one of the first advocates I ever met. We've been doing advocacy together for a really long time. And Chris is also an amazing clinician at the Gateway Institute in California. And so Chris is going to be covering for all of my Lunch and Learn. So these are the events that are every other Wednesday. These are at this time. So every other Wednesday, 11 a.m. Central Time, noon Eastern. I guess that's what, 9 a.m. your time, Chris, Pacific time. And so what those are is it's really an opportunity for us to bring on clinicians, other leading experts in the field, and to talk about specific content areas. So these are more focused on clinician education, education from clinicians for individuals or family members. And these are usually about 45 minutes to an hour. We cover lots of content and then always open for live Q&A. Please visit iocdf.org/peace of mind for two reasons. We want you to visit this for all of the programming to see what Lunch and Learns we have coming up, what events are going to be happening, but also this is where you'll submit questions. So if you have questions you want Chris or the professionals that he's interviewing and working with to address, submit them right here on that homepage so that we can be sure to address them during our events. Next week's Lunch and Learn will be on faith. It's really going to be focused on OCD and faith. It'll be a 4-person panel that will be moderated by Katie. And so you guys will see that. We're excited for that. And then Chris will do the follow-up ones. The Live with Liz, which is this event right here, which is every other Wednesday, is actually going to move to the evening. So we will still be having events every single Wednesday. One will be Lunch and Learn with Chris at lunchtime. And then the Live with Liz is going to be led by our other lead advocate, Tom Smalley. Tom is going to focus on anxiety, athletes, and lots of other amazing content. Those will be Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Again, visit iocdf.org/peace of mind for more information and to stay up to date around when we're having these live events and what they're covering, but that will be what my coverage looks like. I'm very excited because I know it will be amazing, important, useful content for the entire OCD community. All right, so today, Chris is joining us. We have 2 questions that were submitted. Then, of course, we have some questions that you guys post here. Please make sure to post other questions so that we can get to them today. But Chris, before we jump in, I want to take a second and just have you introduce yourself to the community and tell us a little bit about your background and why you do what you do every day.
Well, first of all, hi. It's so good to see you. I am so excited. I didn't know if you announced it live
Yes.
about your pregnancy, so I forgot to ask you. I'm like, am I pretending? You know, is she going on a rest vacation, or is she having the baby? Can I say it? So I'm so excited for you. That's going to be so excited. I've known you forever, so now that you're having like a kid, it's like, what?
I'll be sending lots of pictures, so I'm excited.
Yes, please do. Like, harass me. I love it. So, no, I'm so excited and proud of all you've done, and proud of what the IOCF has done. Really kind of swung in there and stepped in this kind of crazy, hectic time, and have been able to provide so much for the community. So I feel nervous and honored to kind of step into your shoes every other week. I'm not as pretty as you, so all the boys and the girls will have to deal with that. But other than that, I'm so kind of excited. You know, like you, I'm an individual with OCD and related disorders as well. I also am a clinician and an advocate. So it's not broke, don't fix it. I think what you've been doing is great. And I'm just going to kind of step in and give those different perspectives like you can. And I'm excited to kind of bring on a bunch of different guests, some of them from the West Coast, so people get to see what we do out here in California, and just educate people and loved ones and the public on what OCD is, and therapists that want to get into this field. So I'm really excited. So I, like you said, I currently serve as vice president and board member of OCD Southern California. We're an official affiliate of the International OCD Foundation. I'm also part of the Body Dysmorphic Disorder SIG, which is a special interest group with the IOCDF, and I'm one of their lead advocates. I'm a clinician here at the Gateway Institute in Costa Mesa, treating OCD, body dysmorphic disorder, and related disorders. But like you, suffered with this horrible disorder, many years unknown and no treatment. And for me, I come from an entertainment background here in LA, but decided that I also wanted to be a therapist and an advocate, and really make sure that people don't go through what I went through. And my last little shout out is I always have to embarrass her. Liz was the first speaker I ever heard at the IOCF conference when I was really young and not in treatment yet, and a mess, and I couldn't even stay the whole day. But I saw her speak, and she's one of the people that inspired me to do what I do. So being here with you is surreal.
Well, thank you, Chris. And I know that many other advocates feel the same way about you as they've watched you speak openly, proudly and loudly, right, about your different struggles. And I know that you and I have served on a lot of panels together. So I am excited. Chris will bring an amazing new perspective, but one that everybody needs to hear from. So thank you so much for covering, and let's hop into today. So one of the first questions is about relationship OCD, and this is something you and I can kind of both answer, but I'd love to hear your perspective. So the individual said, I understand the concept of uncertainty, but how do you know when to leave a relationship then, or know your sexual orientation? And so I think this is really about, like, how do we differentiate when it is in fact relationship or sexual orientation OCD compared to knowing your sexual orientation, or if you're questioning it. And so if you're willing, would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, so I look at it as 2 questions. So I'll start kind of with relationship OCD, and maybe if you want to add to that, and then we can move on to sexual orientation. Relationship OCD, what's difficult about that subtype is that people do question their relationships, and people do have fights, and people do wonder, hey, I'm watching this movie and they seem head over heels, and my partner and I fight a lot. Does that mean the relationship isn't the right one? So there are going to be these general questions, but the 2 things I see in relationship OCD that I don't see in my friends and family having, OCD, is this urgency. So obviously, let's say your partner has cheated on you, or you found out your partner's been stealing from you. I mean, that warrants maybe a more urgent decision about the relationship. But when working with clients, and I struggled with relationship OCD myself, you could be in these 3 or 4 panic moments a day questioning your relationship and feeling this urgency, like, I have to make a choice right now. I have to get out of this relationship. It's ruining my life. Or if I break up, I'll never find someone better. So I would say the first thing that I constantly see in relationship OCD is that urgency, which is different than maybe if somebody just is questioning their relationship. And then lastly, there's more than this, but the other big bullet point is in relationship OCD, the person will have a great time usually with the person, and then they kind of leave and nothing's happened. There's been no conflict, no fight. They were happy with them this morning. And then the afternoon they're spending all day, is this person the one? Do I like them? Will I cheat? And so in a relationship that doesn't have OCD involved, there has to be an incident or a conflict to maybe have somebody start to kind of question the validity of the relationship. Whereas in relationship OCD, there could be no conflict and people question it. So I don't know if you want to jump in, but those, just to start, those are like the two big things that I see different. And I saw different in my OCD relationship in my first one when relationship OCD was rampant compared to my healthy relationships after.
I totally agree. And I think Chris brought up 2 points that I talk a lot about. One is the urgency, right? Is like, why do we need to, like, it's almost this like, oh, I have this bit of doubt, and so I need to urgently make a decision, versus understanding that doubt exists everywhere, right? Every relationship, you have doubt, you have questions, and sometimes it could be something simple, like somebody says something that you don't totally agree with. Okay, well, that's normal. That's going to happen in any relationship, but OCD latches on of like, why would they say that? What does that mean? We must not be meant to be together, and maybe I don't actually want to be with this person, and kind of rambling. The second piece is, when things are calm, is there insight, right? And what Chris mentioned is sometimes you can be with this person and have a great time and nothing happens after, but the doubt sets in. And that's what I want to kind of look at too, is that oftentimes people with relationship OCD are able to say like, I know I love them, I enjoy being with them, I don't not want to be with them, but what if, right? What if they're not the one? What if long-term I'm not going to be happy? What if one day I wake up and they're not who I'm supposed to be with, right? Those are normal questions that everybody has in a relationship, but OCD latches on and it's like, okay, well then because I'm having those, I need to make an urgent decision, or I need to just get out of this relationship, or I need to fully understand it. And sometimes you won't ever fully understand it, right? Doubt exists everywhere. I love my husband. I love my relationship, but can I guarantee that it's always going to be like it is now? Of course not, right? Like that's life. You live in the uncertainty. You live and accept that, like, okay, I'm going to kind of say it's good enough, or I'm going to accept what it is and move forward. And when it isn't good and there's fights, right, that also doesn't mean I have to leave right away, right? That doesn't necessarily scream for urgent decisions, but instead opportunities to work things out, versus OCD wanting us to make urgent decisions. So
No, I was just agreeing with you. Sorry.
Let's definitely talk too about the sexual orientation piece, because I think that's very different, especially if we're talking about being in a relationship, being happy, but having OCD triggers one way or the other of, am I with this right person? Or should I be in a different relationship? Am I sexually attracted to this person? And having sexual intrusive thoughts or sexual orientation intrusive thoughts.
Yeah, what I was going to add about that component is, as a member of the LGBTQ community, I started feeling same-sex attraction from a really young age. I mean, I can remember some of my first friendships, all just being attracted to kids my age when I didn't really understand what that meant, people of the same gender. And so the process of kind of coming to grips with that and coming out was long, and it was hard and it was difficult, but it was never really about questioning my sexual orientation. For me, it was knowing that society, knowing family members, knowing friends and neighbors, et cetera, weren't going to accept me, and that, there was a lot of legislation against my community. And so it was just this more fear of, if I come out, I'm really doing this, and now I'm going to have to deal with everything that comes with that. I did deal with a little bit of sexual orientation OCD, because OCD is very black or white. And so, I had a friend, one of my friends that I kind of made right after treatment, she and I were very kind of like touchy-feely, and we were really close, and I thought she was really beautiful. And because of that all or nothing, it was like, well, if I think a girl is beautiful, that must mean, am I fully gay? And I was kind of questioning. I think I even did one of those stupid quizzes online. But the point, I mean, luckily that wasn't this huge subtype for me, and it didn't take years to kind of come to grips. I sort of took a step back from the context and said, does this feel like OCD? Let's take the whole, you think your friend is pretty thing off the table. Does it feel like that? Doubt, needing insight, constantly ruminating in your head, going back and forth, black or white. And it absolutely did. And I was able to quickly identify that as OCD and realize, like, even though I may be sexually and romantic to men, attracted to men, women can also be beautiful, and people that are non-binary can also be beautiful. There doesn't have to be this box that OCD wants to put me in, which is very different than sexual orientation OCD. It's just constant intrusive thoughts, doubt of your feelings, and wanting to go back and forth and feeling clarity one moment and then doubt the next. It's very different than somebody who's coming to grips with their sexual orientation or their gender identity.
And I think, one of the big things that you just touched on, Chris, that's so important is that OCD is often rooted in normal thoughts, normal kind of thinking somewhere, right? And then it becomes distorted. But as a female who is married to my husband, and I have a, great relationship, there are plenty of females who I think are beautiful. There's plenty of times where, I might have a question or a thought or a doubt around my sexual orientation. And that's normal, right? That can be human nature, that you may kind of like have a random thought about, another female, or think that someone's beautiful, and that's okay. But the difference is being able to be like, oh yeah, and they are beautiful, and letting it go and accepting or being okay with my current sexual orientation very strongly, compared to letting OCD say, well, why did I have that thought? What does that mean? What does that say about me? And then we see clear OCD rituals, right? Checking for arousal, avoiding social media where we might see an ad of a beautiful female because that could be triggering, questioning and asking reassurance. Oh, I thought this person was pretty. Do you think that means this about me, right? It's very different of kind of having thoughts and letting them be there, compared to I need to address them, I need to understand them, and I need to have certainty around them. And I think that's often when OCD comes, and most people will be able to say when they're insight, not when they're in the middle of a trigger, right? But when insight is good, like, I know my sexual orientation, I feel confident in it, but what if, right? It's OCD is the doubting disease. And if there's any little bit of doubt, that's where it latches on. The reality is that there's doubt in everything you do in life, right? But it's about kind of accepting a level of doubt moving forward.
You also made a really good point there. With OCD, there needs to be this finite answer today. I need to have an answer and move on. And that's not always going to be there, whether it's your relationship, whether it's your sexual orientation. I mean, there's going to be times where, you're not going to get an answer right away. And that's what OCD does, is it makes you feel like you have to get an answer right now. So that would be something to think about as well. And I can just say from personal experience, there wasn't this constant back and forth. Am I gay? Am I straight? What am I? In my own journey. And when I talk to most people in the LGBT community, they have the same experience. It's like, I know, but I was really worried about coming out. How does everybody going to respond? But when I work with clients that have sexual orientation OCD, it's this constant back and forth, like a ping pong or tennis match. So that is always a suspicion too, is this back and forth needing to get an answer right now, versus just being okay with not knowing and saying there's no reason to find out today at 9:30 a.m. Like, it's okay to kind of sit on that. So those are some of the things that I always look for when I can tell when somebody, because I would say with a sexual orientation component, there's a lot of therapists out there that don't know OCD. And I get clients that come to see me, and whether they're trans, whether they're non-binary or gay, et cetera, they've spent maybe 3, 4, 5 years with a therapist figuring out their sexual orientation, but really it's OCD, and they're just getting reassurance each week. So I always kind of look for those OCD components, and then I know which way to go. Okay, is this really somebody who is really having a struggle with their gender identity, for instance, versus somebody who genuinely knows but just has the OCD doubt back and forth?
It's interesting because I always say too, with a good OCD clinician, they should be able to help you tease this apart. Because a lot of times patients with OCD are really stuck up, but how do I know? And how will I know for sure? And my answer is usually also rely on a clinician, because it's the same with other subtypes. So I have trained lots of clinicians in OCD. And one of the first pieces or questions I'll always get is well, with patients with harm OCD, how do we know they're not actually going to harm someone? And my response is always when you're working with an OCD patient, you will know. It's very, very clear, right? Because people are able to say, there's not history. I know I'm not going to do it, but what if, right? And so I need to remove all the sharp objects. Because I need to be certain that I could never possibly do this, even though there's no reason to believe they would actually do it. It's the same with all subtypes, right? It becomes pretty clear when it's OCD and when this is in fact OCD that we're trying to answer or search for, and we know how to treat it, but you have to be with an OCD specialist for them to be able to differentiate that and help you walk through it.
Yeah, and I don't know if you feel this way, but usually like in the very beginning of treatment, context matters a little bit because I notice like with certain subtypes, maybe pedophilia, OCD, harm OCD, sexual intrusive thoughts like I had, there's shame and there's guilt and there's some other emotions that need to be teased out in a separation of like OCD from themselves. But after a while, especially when you've been doing it and working around OCD for as long as we have, you start to get to a point as a clinician, like you can tell within seconds, right away. And, if I'm working with a client with harm OCD, I never feel like I'm in danger, even if the person is 18 times bigger than me and can absolutely like kill me like that, I just don't get worried because they are in so much distress. And even if it's not this outwardly like crying and, oh my God, it's just, you could just tell they're so uncomfortable. They want to be rid of this. It's, getting a master's of science degree in psychology, it's like we had to look and watch a lot of footage of people that were sociopaths or people that do harm people. And if you ever look at the difference, it is night and day. There's no question. So I don't know if you've gotten this. I think one of the hardest things is I have had clients, especially young ones, that have opened up to a therapist about their harm OCD and the therapist overreacting and treating it like it's really a danger. So that's why I always kind of push, like, please, if you're out there and you can, get treatment for you or your loved one, make sure they are a specialist in OCD. The majority of their clients are OCD and related disorders because we can tell it's second nature to us. It's within seconds we can tell.
100%. And I you can't see them, but I keep a jar of knives in my office for exposures. And I've actually had clinicians say to me, like, aren't you nervous to just have knives out in the open in your office? I'm like, you don't understand my population, right? Like there is zero anxiety around me feeling that someone's actually going to harm. It's intrusive thoughts, right? And it is very easy to differentiate. These are unwanted intrusive thoughts followed by repetitive behaviors. Now, what happens with sexual orientation, harm, OCD, scrupulosity, it doesn't matter, any subtype, is OCD starts to make us doubt if they're intrusive, right? Well, what if they're not intrusive? What if I actually want them? What if I could actually engage in them? A clinician can help you tease that apart.
Yeah.
So next question is rumination, distraction, or ERP. What's the difference? So one of the questions that I got when I did a live event recently was, how do I know the difference? Because we talk a lot about rumination being a ritual. We talk a lot about how distraction sometimes is a part of our life that we need to engage in to keep moving forward, but that it's not ERP and that it looks different. And then we talk a lot about ERP. So what are your thoughts, Chris, on just how to help individuals understand the clear difference between those three? And Chelsea, maybe you can put those up so we can see them, but rumination, distraction, and ERP.
Yeah. So the biggest question I get in this realm is, okay, I've done an exposure. Do I just sit there? Like, am I supposed to just sit and stare at a wall? And people will ask because I don't want to do a distraction. And the way that I differentiate, and I don't know if you do this, Liz, but what I tell people is, let's say you have a plan that day. You're going to go to the store, then you're going to pick up a friend, and then you're going to go to a movie, which we don't know what movies are right now in COVID, but let's just pretend, right? The person will say, hey, I was like triggered before I left my house to go out to these errands. I don't want to then do the exposure and then go do these things and be distracted. And what I tell people is there's a clear difference. I always say, there's the big five. Like distractions usually look like sleeping, alcohol and drugs to self-medicate, social media on the phone, TV, or like your computer. Just these kind of like mindless activities that I'm having intrusive thoughts. I don't want to think about it. So I'm going to go self-medicate or I'm going to go watch my phone. But if you have general activities that day, you can still work with acceptance. You can still do the opposite of what OCD is asking you to do and run towards that anxiety and still function. And in fact, you start to teach your brain, like, look, I can still function while having anxiety. I don't have to shut down just because I'm anxious. So to me, it's a clear difference between, hey, I have a thing to do today. I'm going to go do it despite being triggered versus I'm triggered. I need to go do something right away to kind of relax myself and to make me feel good. Rumination is where you have the initial intrusive thought. So let's say I'm watching a TV show. If I was to have pedophilia OCD and I'm watching a TV show and there's like a young actor or actress and I find myself thinking they're pretty, and then I start to freak out. Once that initial thought is hit, anything I choose to do in my mind to figure out or to try to get a conclusion or to get clarity or to get certainty, that's the rumination. So I tell people the obsession, which we can't control, those are intrusive. If that hits you at 9 a.m. after watching the show, if at 6 p.m. you're still thinking about it, that's probably no longer the obsession. That's the rumination. And you've spent all day trying to get clarity in your head and trying to figure out and get an answer that allows you to feel content, feel certain, and move on, which secret, it never happens. So don't even do it. And then lastly, what's the difference between rumination, for instance, and exposure and response prevention? So if I go back to that same example and I've been triggered in the morning about watching a show, let's say I have some free time. It's like, you know what? I'm not going to run from this anxiety. I'm going to watch another episode. And you know what? I have to go to Target anyways. I'm going to make sure that I go into the kids' toy aisle, and I'm going to stay there for a half an hour and just look at toys, which is going to have me around children and look suspicious. I'm going to actually run into that fire with my tools. And then lastly, well, the mental component. How do you do that without rumination? That's where we go into acceptance. I like to think of it as rumination as a very active event. Your brain is working, figuring out. You have all of your people looking things up and searching. But if you take a more acceptance route, it's a more passive route. So why I'm at the store in the kids' toy section, it's really just saying, I don't really know. I don't know if I'm a pedophile or not. I'm not going to try to get that answer. I'm just going to focus on sitting here, doing the exposure, and whatever conclusion ends up happening, I'll have to deal with it, but there's nothing I can do now. So it's a very different mental take than somebody who's spending hours upon hours in their head trying to get an answer.
Love it. Yeah. And I think that, it's a really great question because I think they get muddied. And I think a lot of people, I asked my patients today here at the clinic in group, how many of you have had treatment that wasn't ERP? And the response was like, yeah, it's usually just the E. We can do exposures, but if we don't engage in response prevention, so as Chris mentioned, if you do an exposure, but you go ruminate, you go ritualize, it's not going to be valid, right? Or not going to be successful. The way it works is exposures with response prevention. And so that is really key. Distraction is something that, I also think a lot of us do engage in sometimes that isn't like distraction can be destructive distraction, as Chris mentioned, but it also can be, okay, I do an exposure and I'm at work and I need to keep going, right? I've got this meeting, I've got this thing, and it kind of distracts me, but I wasn't able to necessarily sit for an hour and lean into this full exposure. And that can still be okay, right? Because we need to keep pushing. But if, as Chris mentioned, we're using the distraction as a way to avoid the exposure or a way to not think about it or to try to suppress it, that's when we're not going to see the same long-term benefits. Rumination, which is really important, as Chris mentioned, to talk about, that is a ritual, and we talk a lot about Puro and different OCD categories. It doesn't matter how you label your OCD. Individuals who really focus on the Puro category will talk about how they still have rituals, but it's mental rituals. And so it's really important to acknowledge that a ritual, whether it's a hand wash, going back and forth through a threshold, or saying a prayer, thinking a neutralizing color, ruminating, replaying a situation, that all it's a ritual, it's a compulsion. It's the same exact thing, and it feeds OCD the same way. So we have to remove that in order for treatment to be successful. Now, as Chris mentioned, the way ERP works is it's about leaning in, and it's all about accepting uncertainty, right? Maybe, maybe not, and I'm going to keep doing this, and I'm going to continue to engage in this exposure without running, without trying to feel better, without engaging in some sort of compulsion to get some sort of temporary relief.
Yeah, I mean, I know you work at a residential. We have an intensive outpatient care program here, and I love that because we can do an exposure and then just kind of sit there.
Yep.
We can read a script and then just have the person keep reading it and then really sitting there and accepting, the potential worst case scenario. But I also understand that people are coming to me for outpatient sessions who have a job and they're in school and they have kids and they have a family and, they're taking care of their mom, and they aren't going to have an hour or 2 hours to just sit there. So what I tell them is you're going to have triggers. Make sure you tackle them with ERP. And if you move on from that, you're not moving on and saying, well, if I don't have to think about it anymore, go away, go away. You're saying, okay, you know what? I may be a pedophile, but I also need to take care of my mom today. So I'm going to go do that as well. Like you mentioned, a destructive distraction is going to be where you are doing everything possible to distract yourself so you don't have to face your thoughts. And that's why I always think that, in just my personal belief, I think it would be amazing if more and more treatment facilities for alcohol and addiction worked with OCD therapists, because I have so many clients that self-medicate, and it's to get rid of the thoughts. And so when they finally start to accept the thoughts, that's how they get to a point where what they've been trying to achieve with the self-medication is actually occurring, but with ERP. So I always tell people ERP is a long-term solution. The distractions that you do is temporarily giving you relief, but it's going to come back and kick you in the butt. An hour later, 2 hours later, it's not going to go away.
Exactly. And any of those behaviors at the end, they make OCD stronger because we're still telling ourselves and our fears that we can't face you, right? We have to distract in some way. So let's hop into questions. I know there are so many. And hi, everyone. Thank you all for telling us where you're calling from and who you are. The first question I'll answer quickly. So Jenny, you asked if the SPACE program is good and if I've heard of it. It is amazing. So this is a program by Ellie Leibowitz that he started. I actually was just trained in it recently this past fall. But it is basically a program where the concept is we teach parents, we teach caregivers how to treat OCD if the individual themselves isn't maybe ready for treatment or it's not feasible. And so especially for a 10-year-old, it's a great, great program. Very successful, has wonderful response rates, and I highly recommend it. The great news is for anyone to say they do SPACE, they need to be certified and trained in it. So they've gotten background, they've gotten training, but it is based and rooted in evidence-based treatment. And the concept is that, especially when you're thinking about a 10-year-old, a lot of the behavior change actually comes from family and from the parents kind of stopping the behaviors or changing the way you respond to them. So I absolutely recommend it. And I think it's a great program to consider. Greetings to everyone. So Lahoma, right now, CEs are not available. Actually, I shouldn't say that. They're not available for these events. I'm not sure about the conference. That will be something, actually, I just got an answer. So yes, continuing education credits are going to be available for the Faith and OCD conference. So definitely consider that, which is coming up in May, which is wonderful. Thank you, IOCDF, for doing that. Thank you for all of your amazing questions. Chris, you, your mom, your sister have done amazing work in supporting the OCD community. One of the questions is there any support for family members of an OCD sufferer? Would love to hear a little bit about kind of your thoughts around support that you recommend and that's been really important and useful for your family to get over the years, and how other OCD family members can receive similar support.
Yeah, so we actually do a free family and loved ones OCD support group. It's not a treatment group, but it is support. And we do that every second Saturday of the month from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So if anybody's interested, please hit up the IOCDF and they could forward it to us. And that offers, we usually do a quick presentation at the beginning about a topic to support family members and loved ones who have an individual in their lives with OCD. And then we open it up to questions. We sometimes have family members come and share. But what's been really great about doing this, we've had this group going now for almost 9 years in August, is finding out all the different things that family members and loved ones have shared that work and what don't work. So there's a really good book by John Hirschfeld about supporting a loved one with OCD as a family member or individual. And I just saw, I think, who is it that just released a book? I think it's
Graham Woods.
Yes, thank you. He just released a book for family and loved ones. So those are the two that I've seen that people really are resounding with. I would say the first thing that my mom has always said, that the mistake that she's made, is she didn't reach out to her loved one. She didn't reach out to her support. She tried to tackle it by herself. And she said the reason she did that is because they didn't really understand OCD. But what my mom recognized is she wishes she would have just reached out for general support, to go to with them or to support her in general. She felt like because I was suffering, she had to be suffering and she couldn't go out to eat and celebrate things. So she needed that strength to support me. And that's one of the things that she wishes she would have done. I think it's super valuable to have your loved ones go to a session. I know having my mom and my sister come to a session, they found out clinically what was going on in my head, which made our relationship better because they stopped the whole don't do that, mindset. It was really helpful for them to learn what was going on. And then they learned, of course, about, listening to my confessing or enabling or reassurance. And they pulled that back, which I contribute to a lot of my success once they were on board. There's so much more content. I know we have a conference in July, OCD Southern California, and then there's a large conference in October. But I know the conferences have done a lot more for family members and loved ones, different talks and different support groups at the conferences. And what's great about attending a support group or a conference is you meet other family members, and then they've reached out after the conferences and kind of kept a support system going. So I would definitely look into those books, support groups, conference talks, and making sure that you're taking care of yourself. Self-care is huge, and building your support system.
100%. And I think, Chris touched on all these things, but if you are a parent of a child, I think being actively involved in treatment is required. Like you have to be a big part of it. the second piece is being involved in treatment when someone's an adult. That's kind of up to them, right? What does that look like? I will tell you, my spouse has been to many sessions with me because he needed to understand. My husband's an engineer, and so his mind frame is usually like, well, if you're struggling, let me fix it. And he needed to really understand from a third party, right? My provider, who's been working with me for a long time, that like fixing it is enabling, right? And you actually have to let Liz just sit with distress and kind of be there and support her in a helpful way, but not in an enabling way. But then support groups are an amazing resource and appropriate education. I cannot emphasize that enough. IOCDF.org has resources specific for family members, and I really would encourage you to seek those and share those versus kind of sending someone on a Google path where they may end up with not evidence-based recommendations and referrals and in a tough spot. But definitely check out support groups as well.
And can I add really quick before we
yes.
move on? One of the things that my mom, myself, and my sister, have talked about is my mom recognized that she put a lot of attention on me because I was the one struggling, and my sister found herself feeling very ignored. So that's another thing that I would say is make sure to check in with the siblings who don't have OCD, or check in with the other family members, because sometimes it's kind of like the squeaky wheel gets the oil. It's one of those things where, for her, sometimes she felt like she wasn't getting the support or attention because I was kind of taking it. So I know it is absolutely an acrobat. It's difficult as a parent to kind of balance all of that, but just making sure that you're having the siblings get the care and the support that they need is super, super huge as well.
It's critical. I know both Chris and I's siblings have spoken at the conference and have really played a big role because, one of the things my mom realized early on is that I was in need of the attention and care because my struggle was present and big and in the spotlight. And so my sister, she had to be intentional about carving out time for my sister as well and making sure that my sister still could feel loved and supported because the struggle was focused on Liz.
Yeah, last thing I was going to say is one of my first episodes is actually going to be with Barbara Vanappen at USC, and she created in 1980s, I think, the family accommodation scale. And actually, it's cool. It's like a mini reunion because the two colleagues with her that created it are going to be on. So that's going to be our first episode stepping in. But they have it available online now, and it's in different languages. So it's called the FAS, or the Family Accommodation Scale. And what's great about that is you as a loved one can take it, and it will show you how much you're accommodating. And then, like you're saying about your husband, Liz, they can realize here's the areas I need to pull back. That's the thing we always say is the support in OCD as a family member looks very, very different than anything else. It's similar to maybe a family with somebody who has addiction. It's showing the person love by actually pulling back on the things that you're doing that keep the OCD strong.
100%. So we'll kind of hop through some of the other questions as we start to wrap up today, but great plug. And I appreciate that because the next Lunch and Learn will focus a lot on families and how to address accommodations. Do times of stress exacerbate OCD symptoms? Absolutely, right? We know that if we're more vulnerable, if we're more stressed, our mental health symptoms overall will see an increase. For those with hoarding disorder, please make sure you check out IOCDF.org for more information on hoarding disorder symptoms and treatment. And we will add that as a really important topic for us to make sure that we address in an upcoming Lunch and Learn. We have addressed hoarding disorder before. Another question was about DBS. We recently did a Lunch and Learn with Dr. Goodman, which focused on DBS and other medical interventions for OCD. So please check out both of those. Again, if you go to IOCDF.org/peace of mind, you can find past events and then as well all of our upcoming webinars. I'm considering becoming a therapist specializing in the treatment of OCD. I was wondering if there's any particular programs that are most appropriate. I'll answer this and then let you answer it as well, Chris. I think, Alejandro, the first thing is really to think about what are my long-term goals so that you can kind of determine which degree might be best. Is it a master's? Is it psychology focused? Is it social work focused? Is it a PhD in psychology? What does that look like? And then start to narrow down programs. I never say one program is better than another. There's programs across the nation that fit our individual needs. And so it's really about what am I wanting to do? What I will say, though, is that if you want to become an OCD specialist, make sure you're going to get training, whether that's through your internships, whether it's through practicums or postdoc sites that are specific to OCD training. So a lot of us who are OCD clinicians, we get specific training by certain experts who are well known in the field where we really got to dive in, whether that's at institutes like McLean or it's with individuals like John Abramowitz at UNC or Dr. Barbara Van Nappen or whoever it is. make sure you're going to have some sort of a mentor or opportunity for specific training in the OCD field, because general programs will not just have you leaving being an OCD specialist.
Yeah, I think that's what's great about the BTTI, or the Behavioral Therapy Treatment Institute at the IOCDF, is they actually educate people that have already become licensed therapists, but they educate them specifically on the treatment of OCD-related disorders. And then what's great as a clinician, like Liz said, you'll probably get about 15 minutes. I always tell people that during my master's program, my teacher finally just had me come up and teach the section on OCD, because I knew way more than her. She was like reading from a book. So you'll probably leave with like 15, 20 minutes about OCD throughout your undergrad and your graduate. But that's why the IOCDF conferences, the affiliate conferences, the workshops, things like this, you'll continue to get education as well as internships, etc. It's always difficult to answer this question because every state's different. I knew for me, I wanted to be a therapist. I didn't want to go into research or anything like that. I really liked working one-on-one with clients. So the big 3 degrees here in California is you can become an LPC, work as a clinical counselor, you can do MFT, which is marriage and family therapy, or you can do social work. And so, I got a master's of science in psychology because I really liked the brain and the focus on the psychology of it. So just do a little bit of research, but I believe in every state you'll have to get at least a master's or a PhD.
Yes.
And then
a license.
And a license. And you'll get internship hours, and that's where you pick an OCD internship. The good thing about an internship is you can decide to do it at a specific area. And if your passion is OCD, do your internship with OCD.
100%. And this is something we talk a lot about with licensure as well. So it's really critical. There's this new kind of emergence of life coaches and other individuals who will help give feedback. It's very different than those of us like Chris or myself and others who are clinically licensed, right? That license is this governing board. And what I'll say about specialty care is that one of my big passion points is that mental health is not there yet. And I wish that we were, but I think about the fact that I'm having a baby in a week, right? I'm not going to go to a podiatrist to deliver my baby, right? You go to an OBG, you go to a specialist that's all they do is labor and delivery, and that they know how to address it. It would be silly to ask, an orthopedic surgeon, can you deliver me? Now, have they probably delivered a baby at some point in their training? Probably, but it's not what they do every day. And so that's not the person I'm going to choose to deliver my child in the case that what if something goes wrong, or what if, I want to know that they do this frequently. It's no different with OCD treatment, right? A general mental health provider who might say like, oh yeah, I treat all mental health conditions, or this is what I treat. That is not somebody who specializes in OCD. OCD is a specialized treatment intervention, and you want to go to an OCD specialist. It can be hard to find them. We're doing our best to increase those numbers, to increase access to appropriate providers, but specialty OCD treatment is the difference between successful outcomes and not.
A quick plug to your program. That's why I refer people to the McLean at Houston, is because of that. There's a lot in California. Orange County, where I practice, has the #1 most rehab centers in all of California, or all of the United States, rather. And one of the problems is they'll put on their website OCD, and then people that have gone to a residential out here are the one person with OCD, and they're with people with psychosis, or people with schizophrenia, or people with bipolar or addictions. And that's not the kind of care you want. Now, this is easy for us to say, obviously, because there's so many burdens with financial and location, et cetera. But if you do have the ability to go to a program like Liz runs, you're going to be there with everybody else who has the same disorders, working with clinicians that see it day in and day out. And we build as clinicians that instinct where we're able to jump in and help someone based off of seeing this every day.
And it's our job to refer out. I was just telling my group that this morning as well. Like, if someone is presenting with something that's out of my wheelhouse, it's my job, and I'm an ethical clinician. I'm going to say like, hey, like, here's where I want you to get assessed for this, and I want you to get this treatment because like this isn't what I do, right? I don't treat substance use disorders. I'm not going to pretend to. It's not my specialty, but I'm going to collaborate and help get you connected with someone who does, and that is their specialty. And so fight for it, advocate for it, because specialized care is the difference between somebody who can understand, triage, and get you on the right path versus someone who will maybe be helpful in some manners, but not get the same traction and have you seeing the same results. Remember, traditionally in 12 to 16 sessions, you should see outcomes, and you should start to see and understand how to manage OCD and a reduction in your symptoms. Some people, if you're going to a provider for 1 to 2 years and OCD is not changing, like that, you should question that provider. If you're going to a provider who doesn't do ERP, question that provider from the very beginning. And again, iocdf.org has a wonderful list of questions that is kind of a cheat sheet for when you're looking for a provider that you can ask, what type of treatment do you use? And if they don't on their own say ERP, say thank you and hang up. Ask them where they got specialized. Look those centers up and make sure that it's by people who do evidence-based interventions for OCD, because it's really critical. I know I have some other questions, so let's kind of keep jumping through them. So someone talked about, Tracy, you mentioned all or nothing, black and white thinking, and everything having an emotional connection. Is this common? Absolutely, right? Remember, when we think about OCD, the core of it is the doubting disease, and we want to be certain, we want to be sure. So things feel black and white. I either have to know or I'm not going to know at all. I need to be certain, because if there's any level of uncertainty, I can't live with that. And so that's very common and something that we absolutely see across the board. Thank you, Jessica and others. I love you guys are giving some amazing advice and just amazing feedback overall about how helpful it's been and your desire now to go into OCD education. So I want to encourage you to definitely do that. Yes, OCD is treated the same, right? Different subtypes. We use ERP across the board. We know it works no matter what subtype you're dealing with. Of course, for many individuals, we integrate different modalities, right? Some of us may struggle with emotion regulation skills, and so we need to add those into traditional ERP, or some providers will add in acceptance and commitment therapy ACT into the ERP treatment. But overall, treatment does look very similar no matter what the subtype, which is why it's so important, if you live with OCD, that you become your own specialist and you understand how to do this treatment, because there is a high likelihood that you'll have a new subtype one day and a new intrusive thought will come. The great news is the treatment doesn't change and the tools get to stay with you forever. It's about you being able to pull them out and use them as applicable. I am continuing to go through these, so lots of intrusive thoughts and how great it's been for so many people seeing a therapist. Two last questions. So the first one I want to jump into, Chris, because this is something that really gets me fired up, but I think is important for us to talk about is there a cure? And how we kind of think about OCD management and a cure and what treatment looks like in the long run. I know both of us have been in treatment for a really long time and we still live with OCD, though of course it looks very different now than it did when we were in the middle of our biggest struggle. Can you share a little bit about how you explain and work with patients around this concept?
Yeah, there's one of the biggest game changers with me on this mentality was definitely the idea of learning that people who don't have OCD have intrusive thoughts also. I was growing up and living with OCD. I always had this mindset that other people who don't have OCD just never experience intrusive thoughts. So when we look for a cure, I'll ask clients that ask me that question, what does a cure look like to you? And they're like, well, I never want to have thoughts or negative feelings. And I'm like, that's not how it works even without OCD. So what cure looks like is more what we call management. It's getting to a point where I like to use this line. I tell people the way that you know you're in good management of the OCD is none of your choices that day are made because of OCD and fear. You're making those choices because of your values and because you want to do something. So if somebody's going to bring their kids to a potluck and you're afraid to be around kids because of OCD, yet you choose to go anyways, you're in amazing management. That's the kind of things we look for. You're going to have intrusive thoughts for your whole life because so does your mom, your dad, your cousin, and your neighbor. The difference is they don't read to it the way that we do. So it's learning to let those thoughts go, to accept they're present, but not do anything to them and make choices that you really care about. And you get to a point where I tell people now, I'm more annoyed about having to pay taxes, LA traffic, and the fact that my neighbor doesn't know that they should probably not play music at 2 a.m. than I am about OCD. So when you get to a point where real life problems bug you and more so than the OCD, like you're in really good management.
I always say that because it's so funny. I'm like, I get frustrated about something. And then when I sit back with this moment of clarity, I'm like, isn't it so cool that this is what can bother me right now?
Yes, I'm like, play your loud music. I dealt with horrible disorder for most of my life. Do what you got to do. So I use really quick. I use the example of working out and eating well. I mean, there's no such thing as being cured from having to work out and eat well, and then one day you can just stop. You have to have a healthy lifestyle, and your whole life you take care of yourself with your health and your mental health and working out and diet and just normal kind of care. It's the same with OCD. You just make it a lifestyle, and my lifestyle has become I don't give into thoughts and I don't give into feelings, regardless of how much intensity and doubt comes with that. And to me, that's management. And you get to a point where OCD is much less annoying than when somebody takes an hour to decide what they want to order when they had so much time in line to make that decision. That
Love
might
it.
be more than OCD.
Totally agree. So last question is, how do you reduce, and I just, sorry, I'm going to give my own 2 cents really quick on that one too. One of the things I hear a lot of is this kind of acceptance of like, oh, accepting OCD means I have to accept that I'll suffer forever. And I really want you to take home what Chris just said. Yes, we might still have OCD. And yes, I might always be one trigger away from a bad day or from lots of rituals. But I don't have to accept a life of suffering because of my diagnosis. There is appropriate treatment that with treatment, OCD can be something that's minimal, not very interfering in your life, and certainly something that you can manage on a daily basis. It's really important that that message is clear, because I think sometimes we kind of like, yes, mental illness is here. Yes, we own it. Yes, we have OCD. And people think that that means we have to accept that we're always going to struggle and that it's always going to be terrible. That's absolutely not the case. So last question for today, and then we will give some resources because I see a lot of individuals asking how they can find a provider. So we'll talk about that as we wrap up, is how do you reduce thought suppression and avoidance? I'm afraid of tolerating the moment with the thoughts still being present. I fear I'm only doing compulsions, being fearful of forgetting how to cope. And this is a great question from Ashley, because I think that a lot of times we struggle with, how do I not suppress and avoid? We know the answer, which is ERP, but can you talk a little bit about that, Chris, of like how we really transition to when we're terrified, when we're triggered, when we're anxious, engaging in ERP versus trying to just avoid or push the thought down?
Yeah, I would say you made a good point about all or nothing earlier. That's kind of how people sometimes might come into treatment. And I say the biggest tool that we have is we don't have to get rid of OCD tomorrow. It's going to be a journey. It's going to be a lifestyle. It's going to be a process. So if you're finding yourself doing all of that and it's too difficult to let it all go, the good news is you don't have to do that tomorrow. That's why we create a hierarchy in OCD treatment and we take things up systematically. So I love what Alec Pollard always says. He always says, it's better to have a little E and a bigger RP, meaning like doing a small exposure as long as the response prevention is really tight. So if you're finding yourself, let's say you have fear of harm and you're finding that having a family member over with a knife is just too intense and you have to give into the thought suppression, etc., that's probably not where you should be starting in therapy. Maybe just saying the word knife or writing it out or drawing a picture of a knife on a piece of paper and then practicing the response prevention. So remember, you can do it systematically. What I would say second is that's what we talk about when it becomes a lifestyle is OCD has created a lifestyle of resistance. And it sounds like, based on your question, and trying to prevent bad things from happening. And just like you've learned to do that through ERP in a transition phase, once again, systematically and over time, you'll learn to instead embrace that. And I know that sounds crazy, but now if an intrusive thought pops up or if I'm triggered with something, I love it because I'm like, man, look how far I've come. I can walk in there and still do it without being triggered. So trust the process. It's going to take some time, but you will learn that all the things that you're doing, I'll make this last point. OCD has conned you into thinking that the thought suppression and the avoidance is actually what's keeping you safe and comfortable. In reality, it's what's kind of reiterating this cycle, and it's actually the reason you feel uncomfortable. So when you give up those compulsions, when you practice response prevention, you'll start to notice all of the triggers that initially got you to doing it start to become smaller, and then not giving into thought suppression and rumination is going to be easy because the trigger is so small at that point.
100%, right? I use the analogy of feeding the bird at the restaurant all the time, right? If you're at a restaurant and birds are begging for food and you throw the food to get them away from you, yeah, they go away temporarily, but they keep coming back because they know you're a food source. If you don't throw the food at all, it's more annoying up front, right? Because they stay begging, but eventually they go away and they're not going to come back because they know you won't feed them. It's the same with OCD, right? Thought suppression, avoidance, rituals make us feel better temporarily, but it encourages OCD to keep coming back because you're going to feed it. You have to make the choice to sit with the discomfort in the moment, but know that it's for the long-term gain. And that is where true relief, insight, and all of that actually comes to existence. ERP works, it works across the board. And I'm so excited for Chris to get to spend the next couple months really continuing to help educate, help share his insight, both clinically and professionally, but also personally, because I think that combination is one that's hard to find. You guys are in amazing hands with Chris. For resources, please check out iocdf.org. It's really important that you find an OCD specialist. You can go to the Find Help tab, put your zip code, and lots of providers will show up. You can also reach out to IOCDF directly at info@iocdf.org, or give them a call if you kind of want to help navigate how to find an appropriate provider. I know and I hear you, there aren't enough, and it's hard to access treatment, but I will also say there are providers out there. That is one of the reasons I also encourage you to get connected with your local affiliates, because your local affiliates will have even a better hand on local providers and resources that exist that the foundation or others may not even be aware of. But this can be, which providers do you recommend that take my insurance, or have sliding scale, or have students who are trained? And there's lots of different opportunities and ways with virtual therapy that therapy is becoming more and more accessible. What's important, though, is that you don't just go to any therapist, but that you go to the right therapist who's trained, because that I know Chris and I can both tell you, that is why we're sitting here doing the work that we do today. Appropriately trained clinicians were what allowed us to learn how to manage our symptoms and allow us to continue to do so on a daily basis. Thank you all for joining. I love seeing everybody. I am going to miss you. I will certainly be tuning in as I can and popping in as I can. But know that you are in better hands than you ever could be with me. Chris, thank you for being willing to spend your summer with so many amazing folks and to share your amazing insight. I know that everybody will greatly benefit from your knowledge and your experience. And I'll leave today with my message of hope that always stays the same. Help and hope are always available. Thank you all.